Okay, so welcome back. Tonight is the sixth lesson, and the topic of the class is life is short-ish. And the reason why we say life is shortish is that we will get to it throughout the class and throughout the ideas in the class, where we kind of went through the prior 5 weeks discussing primarily the life and the afterlife. But at the introduction to the course, we mentioned that what we will learn will in fact impact our life and redefine how we see our life and our time here in this world. And the question is, thinking back in the prior 5 weeks, have we accomplished this task? By analyzing the life and the afterlife and all the steps therein, have we accomplished the task that we set out to do, which was not only understand the afterlife, but also have it redefine the way we perceive life at this time. And so if you will take a moment or two to write down in your textbooks, if you'd like, to think about at least maybe one way, 2 ways that we've gained certain perspectives from the prior 5 classes. In lesson 1, we spoke about the fear of death, thanatophobia. And we spoke how the basic reasons for the fear of death are alleviated by understanding the Jewish perspective of life and death and the Jewish perspective of the afterlife, which gives us the perspective that and the understanding that life isn't what we always thought it to be. Rather, life is the true me, the real me. And the real me is not our body. The real me is the soul, and that soul is eternal. Following that, we explained that the body within which the soul is enclosed is a temporary place for the soul. And so when that moves on, the soul moves on and goes to a more pleasurable place for its next step in life. And we explained all those details in the next step of life. And so as we went through these classes, hopefully that gave us the ability to alleviate our thanatophobia, our natural fear of death. But hopefully we can now think about our own mortality without panicking, without the extreme fear that it naturally brings up when thinking about it. Why is there a positive aspect to thinking about one's own mortality? Who says it's important? Why is that necessary? And as a matter of fact, it's interesting to note, and we'll soon see from the sages that it's a common theme amongst the Talmud. But as a matter of fact, there's an app, and it has millions of downloads. It's becoming quite a popular app, and the app is called We Croak. And what does the app do? It sends these messages, pops up on your screen of your phone, and it sends the messages reminding a person that their death is inevitable. It has that many downloads, and it seems to be quite a popular idea. Why? What is so important about understanding or thinking about our own mortality that leads it to be something seemingly common? Here's an image, a screenshot of what a reminder looks like. It comes up a reminder 5 times a day from the app. This one reads, "Don't forget you're going to die. Swipe to see the quote." It's a full quote from some Chinese proverb or Jewish proverb, and they have various quotes that come up all about a person's inevitable death. What's so important about it that what may be the benefits that may come from occasionally thinking about our own mortality? If anyone would like to share any benefit that they may think, if you can drop it in the chat box, that would be wonderful. If we have any volunteers, that'll be great. What can you identify any benefit that may come from occasionally contemplating our own mortality? Making the most of life encourages us to live. Reminder not to stress too much at the current issue. Making the most of one's life. Thank you. Similar ideas to make the most of life. And so this idea to think about occasionally, and that's the key word, occasionally, not constantly, but occasionally thinking about one's own mortality is actually becoming, in recent years, something that psychologists have been discussing and analyzing the benefits that come from it. We discussed it earlier in the first lesson. We discussed TMI, which was the theory of TMT, terror management theory, which was a theory that that our mortality is something that affects everything in our life. From many decisions that we make throughout our life, throughout a regular day, a weekend, whatever decisions it may be throughout our life, small decisions, large decisions, those decisions are affected by our understanding of the inevitability of mortality. But to take it a step further, Torah sees it, and psychology, positive psychology, which is a relatively new concept, has been discussing the idea that not only does it affect the way we live, but it actually has a positive effect on the way we live. There are tremendous benefits to it, and it is something that causes growth. We'll read from text 1, which will give us that insight of a modern perspective on this idea of thinking about one's own mortality. Mora Devora, would you like to read on page 211, text 1? You have to unmute first.
Okay. There is no exercise or reflection as potent, perhaps, as the contacting one's ending. In confronting our own passing, we are better able and more willing to help others see the power of awareness of that which is inevitable, death, helping us to wake up to the tender colors of life and personal creation. In contemplating our own end, we recognize that there's still time for life in whatever time is left. Values are there to be lived until the last inevitable moment. To acknowledge this is freeing.
Thank you. So we see this idea from positive psychology that it helps us in life. As a matter of fact, there's a 2015 study that says that proved a correlation. It studied and proved a correlation between between a positive attitude and thinking about one's inevitable or eventual death. How does that help? They proved that it increased attention to one's health. It causes a person to be less prone to taking risks and an eagerness to obey rules. And the study also identified that this idea caused a person to have a legacy awareness, to do something in their life, something positive, something that will impact their immediate surrounding or the world to be a better place, and to be a better place even beyond their existence in this world. And so in tonight's lesson, we will discuss what the Jewish perspective of this idea of contemplating one's inevitable death What does it do for us from a Jewish perspective? Yes, Devara.
I just have this one comment, that during the whole course of this and reading the book and talking about what we're saying right now, that's intellectualizing it, and it sounds good on paper, they say, but like at this very moment, I happen to be waiting. He didn't call today, but I was waiting for the doctor to explain something about some tests I've taken that could be life and death. And the way I feel about it is, I feel like a different person than the one who's reading this intellectually. Then the real me says, help, help, I might be dying next week or tomorrow or in a couple months. So then what we're reading just becomes, I can't, the more immediate fear takes over, even though what we're reading and discussing and believing, it's like, what I'm saying? It sounds like we're talking about the future, but when it really comes down to it, and it seems more imminent than we expected or want, or we're ready for it, the fear comes, at least to me, the fear comes back. So I don't know if that's a common feeling that people get.
So 2 points. The first one is perhaps more important, and that is that there's a famous saying from the Alter Rebbe, the founding Rebbe of Chabad, who said that what a Chassidish Farbrengen, a Chassidic gathering, can accomplish, even the angel Michael, Michael, cannot accomplish. In other words, the power of having a collective group give a blessing has in God's eyes has a tremendous power, even greater than the power of the angels. And so we are all here a collective group, and so collectively we're all going to bless you. What's your mother's Hebrew name?
Don't tell me. Yehudi. Wait, something like Yehuda, but the female version.
Yes, Yehudis. So we're going to give you a bracha, and everyone's going to answer Amen. Devora Bas Yehudis should only have good health and happiness and only blessings here onward. Amen.
I don't think it's
Amen.
I don't think it's that imminent, because I still might have time to,
blessings always help. So that's the first thing. And
I think
obviously, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think also when you first hear something like that, it's a different reality than when, God forbid if you hear something bad, there's a different reality in hearing it immediately or being afraid of it when you're going through it and processing it as time goes on. There's a lot of changes that occur for most people, but God forbid, that's all I can say.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be okay, but I don't know.
Right. So
none of us know.
The second point that I wanted to mention was that I mentioned that in the beginning of the first class, I believe it was, that obviously everything that we discuss is not to minimize the pain and suffering that people go through. God forbid, we're not minimizing it, and it's something that, especially if it's a friend or a family member, we have to be there for them, empathize with them, empathize with them as much as we can, and when it happens to ourselves as well. The idea of the entire course is to give us an understanding what the Jewish perspective is, and hopefully it will alleviate some of the pain that we experience, give us an understanding on why these things happen, and help us cope as we go through life. And with tonight's class, it's the idea to hopefully give us a not only for the tough times of life, but see it as an impetus for growth as we proceed throughout life every day. So we'll continue. Thank you for pointing that out, Mora Devora. So we'll continue. So what are the benefits from the Jewish perspective of thinking about mortality in general and our own mortality? And I guess here's apropos to mention that, as we'll see soon, there's a quote from the Talmud that says, Rabbi Eliezer says, I believe it is, we'll get to it shortly, that the person should do teshuvah, should repent before their passing. And because a person does not know when their day will arrive, every day we should think that this is our last day, and that will be something that will push us to be better. And so there was a 11th century sage who looked at it from a different perspective. And he says, why do we have to say it from a negative perspective? that we never know when our final day is, we should look at it from a positive perspective. And that is that we never know when Mashiach is going to come. And as we explained in lesson 1 or in lesson 2, that when Mashiach comes, the performance of mitzvahs will be entirely different, and we won't have a chance to perform mitzvahs the way we do today, and we won't have a chance to perform mitzvahs in order to receive the reward or the consequence, as we explained 2 weeks ago. So we should always see that this may be the last day in exile and the first day of the coming of Mashiach, and so we better catch up at what we're doing and perform as many mitzvahs as we can. And so we can keep those two perspectives in mind as we progress in today's class. And so the question is, from the Jewish perspective, what is beneficial about contemplating one's own mortality? There are 3 things that can come, and we'll begin with a verse from Psalms with a Talmudic explanation for it. Betsy, would you like to read text 2a and b on page 212 and 213?
Okay. Be agitated and do not sin. Verbalize within your hearts upon your beds and be forever silent.
And the Talmud continues, the Talmud explains this verse.
We should always agitate our good inclination against our evil inclination. As it is stated, be agitated and do not sin. If this vanquishes the evil inclination, all is good. But if not, we should occupy ourselves with Torah, study as it is stated, verbalize Torah teachings until they enter within your hearts. If this vanquishes it, all is good. But if not, we should recite the Shema as it is stated upon your beds. If this vanquishes it, all is good. But if not, we should remind ourselves of the day of death as it is stated and be forever silent.
Thank you. So what we have from this Talmudic passage is explaining this idea exactly. The Talmud is telling us that what are some things we can think about or we can do that will encourage us to do good throughout our day. And the Talmud begins explaining from the verse that this is King David speaking. First, let's play an offensive war against the evil inclination. If that doesn't work, we should go ahead and study as much Torah as we can. If that doesn't work, be scrupulous with our commitment to saying Shema. And if that doesn't work, contemplate our mortality. Think about the fact that today may be our last. But it's interesting to note and important to point out that there are 4 options that the Talmud gives us, that King David in the verse gives us. The final option is contemplating one's mortality. So in other words, thinking about our mortality is not something we should be using regularly. It's not something that every moment of every day, let's contemplate this idea that who knows, this may be my last moment, because then we'll become depressed beings. It's an idea that once in a while, after everything else has failed, or other ideas may have worked, but it's good to think about it once in a while, once a week, once in 2 weeks. Spend a few minutes thinking about this idea that it's inevitable, it will come to an end, so let's utilize every moment. Now, thinking about our mortality is beneficial in a number of ways. It helps us focus on the eternal, for starters. As we explained in the prior lessons, that thinking about the idea that our souls are eternal, and that is the real need. And as we explained in the end of lesson 2, that really the idea of being alive or the opposite are things which are in existence while we are here in this world. The more mitzvahs and good deeds that we perform, the more alive we are, because those items are inherently alive. And the more things that we do that are just a waste of time, those are, even while we are alive, considered death, because that is the dead part of our life. Those things don't live on, those things don't continue, they aren't infinite, they're finite, and so there's no continuity, which means that in essence, they're never really in existence. And so this idea will enable us to focus more on doing things which are eternal. Contemplating it also brings us to the idea that it will help us remain focused not just general fuzzy awareness that we will one day pass on, But when we think about and reflect on the idea clearly, it helps us focus on what we truly find meaningful and what we truly find of value. It's not to suggest that if we don't think about it, we're just going to run around and sin. It's just the idea that throughout our lives, it's very easy to get caught up in our bodily needs and pleasures and so on and so forth. And this helps us stop for a moment and focus on what really matters. And so really thinking about mortality can help us focus on what really matters, and it can be a truly freeing understanding and a truly liberating thought, this idea. And it brings to mind a story that you may have heard in the past, but we'll share it. And it expresses this idea beautifully.
Dynamite, from the ancient Greek term for power, is a potent material indeed. But a person can hardly encounter a more powerful motivator to plan for his day of death than the opportunity to read his own obituary in the media. Alfred Nobel was a 19th century Swedish chemist and engineer with 350 different patents. He owned 90 factories that manufactured armaments and was the inventor of dynamite. His brothers Ludwig and Robert Nobel were tycoons with oil fields along the Caspian Sea. Alfred invested in his brother's enterprise, and he grew ever wealthier. Then, in 1888, Ludwig Nobel died suddenly while on a visit to Cannes, France. The passing of one of the Nobel magnates was exceptionally newsworthy. In their haste to hammer out the headlines, the French newspapers misidentified the deceased, mistakenly reporting that Alfred Nobel had died. Alfred was shocked to read of his own passing. He was deeply disturbed at the far from flattering obituaries. Bold black headlines screamed, "The Merchant of Death is dead." The fine print was no better. Dr. Alfred Nobel, who became rich by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before, died yesterday. Alfred was sobered by an experience afforded few. Is this how I will be remembered when my time comes, he wondered? Will I be forever tainted as the merchant of death? Historians speculate that Alfred, determined to improve his genuine obituary by improving his lasting effect on humanity, took steps while still hale and hearty to ensure that mankind would remember him as an everlasting contributor to the advance of civilization and quality of life. On November 27, 1895, Alfred Nobel signed his last will and testament, designating 94% of his vast fortune to the creation of the Nobel Prizes. To this day, his name is synonymous with the advance of science, medicine, literature, and world peace. All it took to transform a merchant of death into an angel of progress and peace was a moment of serious reflection on mortality and its consequences.
So what we have here is the first Jewish value, the first, from the Jewish perspective, what it helps to contemplate our mortality is to reprioritize what's truly important. Which leads us to the second point, and that is that it enables us, as some of you mentioned in the comments, it enables us to prioritize and take advantage of every single moment. See, in life, we have various values. We have various ideas that we consider important. We have various things throughout life that we think is necessary. And we know about those ideas, but they don't necessarily seep in to what really matters for us. Take the example of money versus time. There's a great Jewish aphorism, which is mentioned by various sages in text 3, page 215. It sounds a lot better in the Hebrew, but we'll read it in the English. They did a pretty good job of translating it. Folks fret over a lost dime and fail to fret over lost time. But money provides no reprieve, while time is impossible to retrieve. We think about money and we get excited about money, and we get sad when we lose money. We lose large sum of money, right? Someone gave someone else, if someone gave a person and said that either waste a day or you have to pay me $1,000. If you don't pay me $1,000, you have to waste a day. Just sit and watch TV all day. Sit and twiddle your thumbs all day. Some people will actually pay to do that, to waste their time. But time is something that we can never get back. When it comes to items are fungible. You can go ahead, and if you give someone a can of whatever it is, corn soup, you lend a neighbor something, you can go ahead and give them back another can. It doesn't have to be the same exact can. You can right away give them another can. When you lend someone a bike, you can always give another bike. When it comes to people, you can't switch people, right? You don't bring your kid to school and then go to school and pick up whichever kid is available to pick up. All right, today I'll take home Jackie. Tomorrow I'll take home Max, whoever's available. We can just switch them out. The same is with our time. Our time is non-negotiable. It's non-retrievable, to use that Jewish aphorism. It's something that we can never get back. Reminds me of a joke. I may have said it already, but I definitely, it's worth it to repeat. Beryl was an old man. He's breathing his last breath. He's on his deathbed. He can barely see, but he can still hear. And he turns around and he says, so Sadie, are you here? She says, yes, I'm here, Beryl. He says, all right, David, are you here? David says, yes, I'm here. Jack, are you here? Yes, I'm here. Sarah, are you here? Yes, we're all here, Dad. He says, so who's watching the store? This idea of focusing on what's important and utilizing every moment is something that, thinking about our own mortality, gives us push to utilize every moment in the right way. As the Talmud says, the Midrash says, text 4, page 216, if not for our fear of the angel of death, what wrongs we would commit against our Father in heaven. Let us learn from the first 10 generations of humanity. God showered them with abundant paradise-like goodness, including centuries-long lifespans. Yet they were on the brink of destroying the world. What's this idea? When it comes to money or life, the famous Jack Benny quote, money or your life, and he's thinking, he waits a few moments and the thief says, I asked you money or your life. He says, I'm thinking. The 10 generations, the first 10 generations of the world, we look through the Torah and we see that they had these great long lifespans, 600 years, 800 years, Methuselah, 969 years. Imagine what we can accomplish with so much time. And what they utilize their time for? To destroy the world. Because they saw it, we have so much time. They didn't look at the inevitability of death. And so learning from their mistake that just because they had so much time doesn't mean that it's forever. We also have so much time. We may not have 800 years, 969 years, but 120 years, that's a lot of time. There's a lot of time in every day. If we were to utilize every moment of every day, now we are human, obviously. We're talking about idealistically, and having those ideals seep into our day-to-day life. There is time that we're going to waste. We're humans. We're going to sit and idle. We're going to sit and whatever it is. But can we step up our game a little bit? Of course we can. We can utilize our time. We can value our days, value the moments of our days. In fact, by Abraham, the verse uses an interesting term, and it says, Va'avram zaken ba bayamim. And Abraham was old, coming with days. What does the term coming with days mean? It's an interesting term. The commentaries explain what the verse is telling us is that he came with all his days. Every single day of his, every moment of every day was utilized to its fullest capacity. Thinking about our own mortality gives us the ability to appreciate every moment of life and to utilize it to the end. And that's why we think more about money than we do about time, at least some people. Because without looking at the inevitability of death, without looking about our mortality, we just kind of put it on the back burner and we think that, hey, we're going to be here forever. But money, that's important. Time, dispensable. If not today, I'll do it tomorrow. If not tomorrow, I'll do it the next day. And so we want to go after money, and we go after money, and we go after money, and then we realize that there's not much time. And so this awareness enables us to live life fuller. And Devorah, when you asked your question at the beginning of the class, it reminded me of this piece that was written by a kid, 16-year-old kid, Miles Levine. He was a Jewish boy from Michigan who in 2005 was diagnosed with a rare pediatric cancer. And he began to post updates online in order to keep his family and friends up to date with his situation. Sadly, he passed in August of 2007, 6 days before his 19th birthday. But his writings were made into a book, his experiences were made into a book, and text 5 is an excerpt of one of those writings. Dr. Herman, can you please read text 5 on page 217? You have to unmute.
I'm sorry. I went to the driving range the other day and I was thinking how you start out with a big bucket of golf balls and you just start hitting away carelessly. You have dozens of them. Each individual ball means nothing. So you just hit it, hit. One ball gone is practically inconsequential when subtracted from your bottomless bucket. There are no practice swings or technique reevaluations after a bad shot because so many more tries remain. Yet eventually you have to reach down towards the bottom of the bucket to scavenge for another shot. And you realize the tries are running out. Now, with just a handful left, each swing becomes more meaningful. The right technique becomes more crucial. So between each shot, you take a couple practice swings and a few deep breaths. There's a very strong need to end on a good note, even if every preceding shot was horrible. Getting it right at the end means a lot. You know, as you tee up your last ball, this is my final shot. I want to crush this with perfection. I must make this count. Limited quantities or limited time brings a new, precious value and significance to anything you do. Live every day shooting as if it's your last shot. I know I have to. I found out today 5-year survival rates were just 30%.
So the bottom line is, life is too short. Life is too short, as they say, to hold grudges. Life is too short to worry. Life is too short to make all the mistakes yourself, as my father would always tell me. Got to learn from others. He still does. May he continue telling me till 120. What else, if we can think for a moment, what else is life too short for? Jot it down. Think of one other item except for grudges and worries and mistakes. What else is life too short with? You can pop it in the chat box. Let us know what else you come up with. What is life too short for? Life is too short for regrets. Life is too short for killing time.
Life is too short for watching your children grow up. Sometimes it happens overnight.
Yes, indeed. As I'm learning. Anyone else would like to share? In the chat box or unmute? Life is too short for not repenting, for not doing tshuva. It's true. Okay, so we have various ideas, and as we go through our days, it's something. This is another point, according to Judaism, of why thinking about our own mortality occasionally, not too often, but occasionally, will help us think about what's important. And perhaps it'll help us imagine this idea with the following parable. It's a famous parable that has been repeated by various sages throughout the ages. And the story begins with Shmerel. Shmerel, our favorite character. Shmerel was a lo yitzlach, as they say in Yiddish, a lo yitzlach. He was a shlepper, he was a shlemiel, he was a shlemazel. Everything he touched went sour. So he got a business at the local lumber yard, and everything started to break. No one needed lumber anymore. And then he went and he got a business at the local restaurant, and no one was coming to eat. Then he went and he got a job at selling iPads, and suddenly Apple came out with the newer iPad, and he was stuck with a lot of stock. Whatever he did, it didn't work out. He comes home one day and he's stressed out and he's overtired and he's overworked. And he's flipping through the paper and he sees an ad. And it's an ad for a special cruise that's headed to this unique place called Diamond Island, where the streets are paved with diamonds. There are diamonds like sand and dust wherever you go. There's diamonds all over the place. And it's a free cruise. It's not a free cruise. It's a free trip. The only thing you have to pay is the fare of the ship to get there. But once you get there, you can do whatever you want. You can take whatever you want. So he comes to his wife and he says, look, let me try this. Maybe I'll go there. I'll go to this place. I'll pay the fare, which we don't have. We'll have to figure it out. And I'll get to Diamond Island and I'll become rich. I'll figure it out. With no other choice, she goes ahead and she agrees, and they sell the last few tchotchkes they have at home, and they sell it, and they have enough money to buy the fare for this boat, and he takes the boat to Diamond Island. He arrives at Diamond Island, and as he sees it from afar, it's glistening in the sun. It's beautiful. It's shiny. And as he gets closer, it's true. It's all true. Around Diamond Island, there's just diamonds. The floor, the dust, the dirt, you can't even see the ground. It's all covered in diamonds. He jumps off the boat and starts stuffing his pockets with diamonds in his single brown suit that he had with him that he took for this momentous trip. And he figures, all right, where do I go first? I haven't eaten in a long time. It's been a long travel, and he goes to the local restaurant. He looks at the menu. He finds the most expensive thing because now he's rich. He's got all these diamonds. And he orders the most expensive food. Comes the waiter at the end of the meal, gives him a check. It was a check from the rich people. He's no problem. He pulls out a few diamonds and hands them to the waiter. And the waiter looks at him and says, what are you giving me? He says, diamonds. Don't worry, you can keep the change. Still giving a shocked face. He says, no, you don't have to be worried. Don't worry. I have more. You can take the rest. He says, no, you don't understand. Over here, everyone has diamonds. Diamonds are worthless. Diamonds are meaningless. He says, really? So how do I pay? What do people pay in? He says, people pay with schmaltz. Schmaltz. Raise your hand if you're familiar with schmaltz. Schmaltz is chicken fat. Chicken fat, that's how they used to cook in the olden days, and nowadays many people use it for Pesach instead of oil. Chicken fat, that's what people use here to pay. It's a commodity, it's a luxury that people don't have. We don't have that many chickens here, and so chicken fat is something, schmaltz is something very, very rare and very costly, and so that's how people pay. He says, look, I don't have any schmaltz. The waiter speaks to the boss, and they say, all right, he can work in the kitchen for a week to pay the fare of how much money he used, how much food he ate. He goes to the kitchen, starts working, and in short order, a few months later, not only is he running the kitchen, he became the sous chef, he became the main chef. It's 6 months later, and he now owns the restaurant. He did so well over here in Diamond Island. Everything was working well. He owns the restaurant, and he's slowly building up, amassing a fortune to his name, a fortune of schmaltz. He's got buckets and barrels full of schmaltz, and he's keeping them in the freezer and in the refrigerator. And he's got these underground vaults where he's keeping these schmaltz, and he's slowly but surely becoming the rich man of town. He opens a second restaurant at the other end of town and a third restaurant near the port. It's a year later, and it's time for him to go back home. He's the rich man in town. He looks all fancy. He's got these fancy clothing that he had a tailor custom made for him. And he hires a ship to take him back home. And on the ship, he loads all his barrels of schmaltz. He loads the barrels of schmaltz, and he arrives home. His wife and his children are waiting at the dock at the appointed day that he was going to return home. And they're waiting, and he arrives home, and he's all excited, and he's jumping from joy. And his wife is looking, where's the money that he made? He says, oh, I became super rich. And they start taking the barrels off the ship one by one. And he says, right here, this is my fortune. Look at this, barrels and barrels of schmaltz. And she says, schmaltz? And they start opening the barrels, and they started rotting on the trip on the boat. And it has this foul odor. And she says, schmaltz, what's going on here? What's this all about? And he says, what do you mean? This is where it's at. And as that happens, he's slowly coming to the recognition of his mistake, how he was supposed to go there to get the diamonds and bring the diamonds back. Because yes, they're worthless there, but here is where it's at, back home with his family. And he thinks quickly, his mind is racing, the schmaltz is worthless, he dumps it, and he starts going through his clothing. And he finds that original brown suit that he had. And he goes through the pockets, and he finds the few diamonds that he managed to keep in his pockets in that first brown suit a year ago that he came with. What's this a metaphor for? What is it a parable? It's a parable for this exact idea. We go through life, we were sent to this world to collect diamonds. There's a lot of diamonds. What are the diamonds we're sent here to collect? Mitzvahs, to put on tefillin, to keep Shabbos, to eat kosher, to study Torah, to eat matzah on Passover, to make sure we don't have any chametz. These are the diamonds that we're here to collect. But we come here to this world, and we're preoccupied with the schmaltz. We're preoccupied with all the mundane things in the world, and we forget sometimes about what we're supposed to be focused on. We forget sometimes of what the diamonds are that we're supposed to be collecting. We forget sometimes that this is why we were sent here. We weren't sent here to collect the schmaltz. We were sent here on a mission to have all the diamonds. And that is what we're supposed to remember, that we were sent here to collect the diamonds. And so recognizing our mortality, thinking about that fact that we're going to have to come back with all our diamonds, we say, hey, I better start collecting my diamonds now. I'm not going to lose sight of my goal and start collecting schmaltz. I'm going to collect my diamonds. Once we have this idea of understanding that focusing or thinking about our own mortality occasionally will enable us to focus and prioritize what's important, take advantage of every moment of life. Taking advantage of every moment of life, making sure to collect diamonds, never stops. Never stops. There's no such thing as retirement from Judaism. It's not that we reach the age 65, we reach the age 75, 85, whatever age it may be, and you know what? Now I'm going to take a step back. On the contrary, in Jewish tradition, as we get older, we have to step up our game. Shmuel, Bob, can you read for us text 6 on page 220?
Rabbi Yehoshua stated, those who are married in their younger decades should nevertheless remarry in their old age. Those who had children while they were young should continue to have children in their older years. So it is stated, sow your seed in the morning and do not withhold your hand in the evening, for you do not know which will prosper, whether this one or that, or whether they will be equally good. Rabbi Akiva stated, those who study Torah in their youth should continue to study in their old age. Those who had disciples in their younger years should continue to have disciples in their seniority. So it is stated, sow your seed in the morning, etc.
Thank you. If something is good and it's worth doing even when we're older. It's worth doing to the last moments of life. There's plenty of time to relax and retire in the afterlife. There's plenty of time to do all that in the afterlife. This life, we're here for working. We're here for accomplishing, for achieving. And ultimately, we're most happy when we are working, when we're achieving, when we are productive. Because that's why God created us. He created us to be productive beings. As a matter of fact, in the medical field, there's an understanding that retirement, based on studies, that retirement can be damaging for health. As we see in text 7, page 221, it's an excerpt from a study that was done, from research that was done. Page 221, retirement can cause a drastic decline in health, according to a new study. Research by the Institute of Economic Affairs found that both mental and physical health can suffer after retirement. The study, Work Longer, Live Healthier, the relationship between economic activity, health, and government policy shows there is a small boost in health immediately after retirement, but that over the longer term, there is a significant deterioration. It suggests retirement increases the likelihood of suffering from clinical depression by 40% and the chance of having at least one diagnosed physical condition by about 60%. The probability of taking medication for such a condition rises by about 60% as well, according to the findings. People who are retired are 40% less likely than others to describe themselves as being in very good or excellent health. And if you see in your books on page 222 a figure on how all various things affect us, physically and mentally, if we take that step back. And so this is the flip side of all our kvetching about work. That yes, we kvetch that it's work and it's too hard and it's just doing every day the same thing, whatever it is, and we got to take a step back. But you know, productivity is important for our happiness and our sense of fulfillment. This idea really, according to Torah, the elderly is not just not someone or an age to be shunned or to looked at as old-fashioned. Right nowadays, there's a saying, "Okay, boomer." But on the contrary, the elderly are the greatest gift to society. They're there for us. They're there for us in various ways. And more importantly, they teach us in how to live because their experience is invaluable. to the next generations. And the Torah is filled with verses that speak about the importance of speaking to the elders, listening to the elders, following what the elders tell us to do. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to work until our last dying day. What it means is we have to be productive until our last day. Productive comes in all different forms. Productive doesn't mean going to work 9 to 5. No, retiring from work may be a good thing. But following our retirement from work, we shouldn't just sit back and relax. Following retirement from work, now we got to step up our lives in other areas. Now is a perfect time to study more Torah. Go back to yeshiva, if not literally, which may be tough for some of us, but virtually. Spend an extra hour a day, 2 hours a day to study Torah. As a matter of fact, the Rebbe would stress this concept time and time again on how, because of the experience of age, that makes the mental capacity stronger. And so when it comes to study of Torah, there should be special learning halls and sessions for the elderly. Because that's the time that we have now to be more productive when it comes to the study of Torah. To be there for the youth, to help educate the youth, to volunteer with the youth, to teach them how to get through life. To quote from our sages an important statement, and elsewhere it's said even more powerful, but we'll begin from what's in our books on page 223. If the elders advise you to destruct and the youth to construct, heed the counsel of the elders. Because destruction upon the advice of elders is constructive, and construction upon the advice of the youth is destructive. And elsewhere, the Talmud tells us that this is talking about the building of the Beit HaMikdash. And elsewhere it says, if the elders advise you to destruct the Beit HaMikdash and the youth to construct the Beit HaMikdash, heed the counsel of the elders. This is how important it is to follow the counsel of the elderly and the important responsibility that the elders have to study Torah and to give that counsel, to be there for the youth, to spend the time, whatever it may be, writing articles if that's something that people can relate to. As we get older, we have to utilize our time, be as productive as we possibly can. And so if we can no longer be in the field, to work in the field, then help others. But be as productive as we can. It's a Hasidic saying in English. It says, I'm not sure where the root from it is, but retiring is just retiring. Put on new tires. We're headed somewhere else, but we're still moving. New tires. It's a new mission, but just as productive, and step it up again, especially with added study of Torah. While preparing this class, this idea brought to mind this famous quote from Ronald Reagan, and so I figured I'd share it here. I'm assuming many of you have seen this. Some of you may have seen it live, but I'm going to share it nonetheless.
You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuba Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience. If I still have time, I might add, Mr. Truitt, I might add that it was Seneca or it was Cicero, I don't know which, that said, if it was not for the elders correcting the mistakes of the young, there would be no state.
So there we have it. And that's really the Torah's view, that the elderly is a very cherished time. That time as we get older, it's an important time, and it's a time to be as productive, if not more productive, than we were in our youth. And especially by strengthening and studying as much Torah as we can, performing as much mitzvahs as we can, which we, for whatever reason, we may have not been able to do as we were younger, and deepening our relationship with the Almighty. That's what the time is there for. It's there not to relax that we have the afterlife for, but to be as productive as possible. Which leads us to the next topic, and the final topic of this course, which really will throw a wrench into everything we've studied up until now. The entire course was based on the premise that death is inevitable. It's going to happen. It's going to happen to everyone. But the question really is death inevitable? Seemingly, according to Torah, it is. There's the life, there's the afterlife, there's a moment of passing, as we discussed, there's a heaven, there's hell, and so on and so forth, there's reincarnation. But is it absolutely inevitable? Is death absolutely inevitable? And so to discover what Judaism believes about this topic, is death absolutely inevitable, we have to go back to the beginning of time, to Adam. Text 9a, page 224, the quote from the book of Genesis, from the famous story of the tree of knowledge. Right, the first one who, forgetting the joke. It's a good joke about Adam eating the apple, but it slipped my mind. Either way, this is the story of the tree of knowledge. As a matter of fact, I guess as I mentioned, it's the apple. It wasn't an apple, according to Judaism. The Talmud tells us that it wasn't an apple, it was a fig tree, or it was stalks of wheat, or it was a vine of grapes. It's a discussion in the Talmud what it was. But it definitely was not an apple. Apparently that was Michelangelo's imagination. Either way, what does the verse tell us in Genesis chapter 2? God commanded man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but do not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for on the day that you eat from it, you will certainly die. And what happened? Adam goes ahead and eats from the tree of life, of good and evil, of knowledge, and he doesn't die. Was that an empty threat from God? No, says the Talmud. The Talmud explains that it doesn't mean that he will die instantaneously. It means that he will now become a creature who has death. In other words, it's on the day that you eat from the tree, you will surely become a being that dies. Because initially, when God created man to live eternally, to live forever. There was no death in the cards. There was no death in the picture. Man was created to live forever, and that stopped with the sin of the tree of knowledge. As the consequence tells us, text 9b, by the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, for you were taken from it. For you are dust, and you will return to dust. That is the consequence of performing the sin of the tree of knowledge. That wasn't the initial plan. That was a glitch in the system. God planned for man to live forever. All those people who are worried about overpopulation, that would have posed a big issue. Man was supposed to live forever. And so death became part of the human condition with Adam and Eve's mistake of eating from the forbidden fruit. That's when it became part of us. It wasn't part of the initial plan. As a matter of fact, because it wasn't part of the initial plan, death is not inevitable. Because when Mashiach comes, people will live for eternity. In good health, important point. In good health and happiness. People will live in good health forever. As the verse in Isaiah tells us, text 10, page 225, God will eradicate death forever and wipe the tears off every face. Death will be abolished. There won't be death. People will live forever. Just like Adam and Eve were supposed to live forever, and they ruined it with the sin of the tree of knowledge. But hold on. We just explained for 5 weeks, an hour and a half each class, all about how death is not such a bad thing, how the afterlife is beautiful. It's the most pleasurable thing for the soul. Death is not negative necessarily. Obviously, it's painful for the individual, and we're not downplaying the pain and suffering. We didn't downplay throughout the pain and suffering that people go through, especially family and friends. But ideologically and theologically, we explained that death is not necessarily a bad thing. As a matter of fact, it's putting the soul back to where it wants to be. So why are we saying that death is going to be eradicated? And death is a consequence of sin. Now we're seeing it as a glitch. Now we're seeing it as something negative. And so to better understand this idea on why death will be eradicated, to better understand this idea on why we're saying that death is I do not know how to go on to the next slide.
I have time. It was Seneca or it was Cicero. I don't know which.
Sorry about that. I don't know how to go to the next slide. Let's try it this way. To better understand this idea on why now suddenly we're saying that death is not necessarily such a good thing, we have to better understand this idea of why it was the consequence for the sin of the tree of knowledge. There we go.
You already are the
Nope.
oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your call yet.
If anyone knows how to go to the next slide and why it's not working, please let me know. Let's try this one last time, and if not,
Did you minimize the YouTube completely?
I did. It's in. Oh, there we go. Okay. Thank you. I just started a new. There we go. Okay. Thank you.
You already
Oh,
are the oldest president in history.
Ah,
back to it.
hmm.
Some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent.
Okay. Here we go. Back to Adam and Eve. Before the sin of the tree of knowledge, the body was an extension of the soul. The body was selfless. The body had no sense of independence. It had no ego. It was purely an extension of the soul. And so it had no desire other than to do the will of God. There were no conflicts of interest between the body and the soul.
Excuse me, Rabbi. I can't hear you anymore.
You can't hear me. Uh-oh.
I can't hear you anymore.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Does everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you.
All right.
Yes,
I share the screen. Do you hear me? How about now? Do you
Yeah.
hear me?
yes, we hear you.
Okay.
hear you.
All right.
I hear you.
So the body was an extension of the soul. It did whatever God wanted. It was almost like it was the soul itself. If so, it was as eternal as the soul was. That was the plan for the body, to be as eternal as the soul was, because the body was one and the same with the soul. What happened? Once Adam performed the sin there became this conflict of interest. There was the creation of the ego of this dependency, this independency. The body was entirely independent at this moment. That's what happened when Adam performed the sin. The body suddenly got an ego. The body suddenly became separate from the soul. They became conscious of their bodies, Adam and Eve. They got an ego and separate from the soul. Why did that bring about death? So the Rebbe explains, text 11, page 226. Rachel, can you read for us text 11?
Yeah, sure. Text 11. The condition of death that was introduced to the world through the sin of the tree of knowledge was a natural consequence of the very sin itself. To explain, life is associated exclusively with holiness. Unholiness, on the other hand, is death. As a result of the sin of the tree of knowledge, unholiness, spiritual death, mingled with the human identity from which the condition of physical death is a natural eventual consequence.
Thank you. So what happened at the sin was that now there was spiritual death. What is spiritual death? Spiritual death is the separation of the body from the soul. Sorry, the separation of the values of the body from the values of the soul. When the values separate, which is what happened at this sin, where the soul was now had its values aligned perfectly, but the body's values were now misaligned from the soul's values because the body now saw it with its own ego, its own independence, its own values, different than God's, which is why it sinned. That is spiritual death. Spiritual death, a misalignment of body and soul, will now cause physical death, a misalignment of the physical body with its soul. They can no longer live for eternity. They can no longer be something which will be there forever. And so now, because of this misalignment, physical death became inevitable, just like the spiritual death is a reality. The spiritual death became a reality, physical death became inevitable. But as Isaiah prophesied, the good news is that there'll come a time when we'll go back to the way it was before. And how is that? When will that be? That will be with the coming of Mashiach. Why is that? This idea of having a separation between having spiritual death and having physical death, a good example would be food. Food. What's food a good example for? Food, there's the physicality of it, there's the body of it, and then there's the soul of it. The body of it is its taste, its texture, its smell. That's the body of the food. The soul of the food is when we eat it, it nourishes us. It gives us excitement. It can give us a satiating feeling. It can give us energy to now continue throughout our day. But the body and soul of food doesn't always align. We don't always eat food because it's healthy and because it's good for us and because its true purpose is its soul. We don't always eat the food for its soul. We have that ice cream every once in a while. That has nothing to do with the soul of food. As a matter of fact, the soul of that ice cream is no good. Right? Our doctor tells us we're having one ice cream too many, at least me. Right? We're not eating the food for the soul of the food. We sometimes eat food for the body of this food only because it tastes good. It's spicy. It may not be good for us, but we're going to eat it anyhow. How do we make sure the body and soul of the food is in sync? When we go ahead and we eat only food where its body and soul are matched up with its true purpose. We eat healthy foods. We eat when we're supposed to eat. We eat the amounts we're supposed to eat, and then we're healthier people. We can think better, we can focus better, we can do a lot of things better. The more we do that, the better off we are, the healthier we are. God willing, the longer we'll live. The same idea is when it comes to remedying this glitch in our system. The glitch was that we had body and soul separated. We had spiritual death, which caused the physical death. When we rectify the spiritual death, in other words, when we go through life and we make sure our body is in sync with our soul, we make sure the body and soul of every item we encounter are in sync. When we utilize something which seems to be mundane and we reveal the divine aspect within it, as we discussed earlier in lesson 1. When we utilize something which is mundane, something which is neutral, a computer, a phone, a book, whatever it may be, which isn't inherently holiness, but we know that deep down it has a divine soul, it has a purpose, a godly purpose, and we utilize it for that godly purpose, we are now realigning the body and soul of these things. And one by one, we realign the body and soul. When we realign the body and soul of everything, including ourselves, as much as we possibly can, we bridge that gap. We slowly but surely pull the two sides together until they're perfectly aligned. And when that goal is reached, death will be abolished. There'll be eternal living because there won't be any more spiritual death. So there won't be any more physical death. We'll do everything for the ultimate purpose for which it exists. And we will utilize every power that we have for our ultimate purpose, which is to do good. Which leads us to not only abolishing the inevitability of death, eternal life, but bringing us to the final stage, which is the resurrection of the dead. That really death was only for this time where sin caused death. But once there is bridging that gap and eternal life, there'll be the resurrection of the dead. So one tailor turns to another and he says, look, soon's going to be the coming of Mashiach. There'll be the resurrection of the dead. We'll have a lot more business. There'll be a lot more people. So the other guy responds and he says, yeah, but there's going to be a lot more tailors also. So the first guy says, yeah, but we know the latest styles. When it comes to the resurrection of the dead, I see I have a question. I'll stop for a moment. The chat box. What about pain and suffering that often precedes death? How does one not worry about that? Thank you for that question. We somewhat touched upon that in the beginning with our discussion. We discussed that at length in lesson number 2. So it's not to obviously minimize any death or suffering, any pain or suffering, but the specific fear that we spoke about wasn't the pain or suffering preceding death, rather was about the alleviating the pain of death itself, of no longer being here. Alleviating the pain and suffering that precedes death is part of the broader question of why does pain and suffering happen? And why do people suffer? And there's no real answer to that. There isn't. That's a question that only God can answer, of why people suffer, why good people suffer. But the general understanding of that is that it's God who's doing it, and God has a reason for it. And knowing that God has a reason for it, God being infinite, is something that we can never comprehend because we're finite. And an example can be when a parent takes a knife away from a child and the child's screaming, thinking that that parent is a terrible parent. Because here I want to play with the knife and my parent's taking it away from me. It's wrong. Or when we go through a surgery, a child goes through a surgery and the child goes through the surgery and he can't understand why the doctor is hurting him and cutting him and it's painful, it hurts, right? If anyone wore braces even, And you think about, when the dentist, the orthodontist strengthened the rubber bands on your braces, it hurt, it was painful. But we don't think of the pain as pain in and of itself. We know that there's a purpose for that pain. When it comes from pain that happens to people, again, there's no answer, and I'm not playing it down, but it gives us an understanding that there is something greater at hand. There's the divine at work, and it's infinite. It's something that we can't understand. And so the answer is that there is no answer. There's definitely more details to that. We discussed it a little bit in lesson 2, and definitely for another class. What knowledge was in the tree of knowledge, and why was death the punishment for obtaining knowledge? That's a good question. It wasn't obtaining knowledge, rather it was eating from the tree of knowledge, because eating from the tree of knowledge, we've discussed it at length, and it's a long question to answer in the amount of time that we have left. But in short, it wasn't for obtaining knowledge. It was for the, up until the tree of knowledge, the evil was clearly discernible. It was good and there was evil, and they were clearly discernible. Once he ate from the tree of knowledge, now there was a fusion of good and evil. There was nothing that was 100% good and nothing that was 100% evil, and everything was able to have good and evil in it, which caused for tremendous confusion in performing mitzvahs, in living life, in people themselves. That now became the concept of death. And so one of the reasons why there now became the concept of death was because now that there's evil, and evil mixed into people, if people would live forever, then evil will live forever. And so there was death, and death will only be abolished once evil is abolished, and therefore death won't be in existence. But again, that does not answer the question fully. That takes for a deeper discussion. So back to resurrection of the dead. Resurrection of the dead, text 12, page 227. Resurrection of the dead, says Maimonides. David, Lewis, can you read for us text 12, page 227?
The resurrection of the dead is the foundation of the Torah of Moses. One cannot maintain a connection to the Jewish religion and the Jewish nation without this belief.
Thank you. This is a fundamental belief, says Maimonides. As a matter of fact, the 13 principles of faith, this is the 13th principle of faith. The 13th principle of faith is that I believe with firm conviction in the resurrection of the dead. And as we see here, Maimonides says that if we don't get the resurrection of the dead, if we're missing belief in the resurrection of the dead, we're missing Judaism. We're missing the entire concept of basic Judaism. It's a basic belief in Judaism. It's a foundational belief in Judaism. So not only will people live forever, not only won't there be death, but all those who have since passed will come back, and will come back the way we remember them. And as we discussed, someone asked me earlier, if someone was sick when they passed away, if someone was missing a limb when they passed away, how is that going to happen? And we explained that what will happen will be that they'll come back the way they were when they left, whether it was sick or missing a limb, whatever it was. Then God will heal them, and they will be as healthy and as strong as they ever will be. So we'll be reunited physically with our loved ones. But as we explained in the prior 5 classes, that the ultimate is when the soul is fully expressing itself. When the ultimate is when the soul is fully in sync with its divine origin, that's how it will be a soul within a body. Because the body will then live forever, because the body will simply be a full extension, a simple extension of the soul, as it was when God first created the world. So we can have our cake and eat it too. We'll have eternal life. We'll have all our loved ones, and we'll have them in the flesh. We'll be reunited with them. So now that we understand this idea, now we can understand that the ultimate answer to death is not its justification. It's not its explanation. The ultimate answer to death is its abolishment, because that's when the body and soul will be entirely in sync. And we'll conclude with a portion of a letter that we've already discussed in lesson 3, a letter a different portion of the letter, a letter that was written by the Rebbe in 1967 to General Arik Sharon when he lost his son Gur in a training accident in Israel. And the Rebbe analyzed the response, the statements that we tell mourners. And we read, and we'll read the section of that letter that expresses this exact idea, that is the purpose of this. That is the purpose of this statement. Goldie, can you read for us text 13 on page 228? I can't see if you're there or not. If you are, unmute. There we go.
Okay, what do I do now?
228, text 13.
Okay. A kernel of consolation is captured in the traditional hallowed statement of consolation that has been used to comfort mourners by tens of generations of our nation's communities that followed the Torah tradition. May the Omnipresent console you among the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. At first glance, the association of these two concepts, Jerusalem's destruction and a personal loss, is perplexing. The reality, however, is that we have perfect confidence that God will rebuild the ruins of Zion and Jerusalem. He will gather the dispersed remnants of Israel from the ends of the earth through our righteous Mashiach, and he will bring them in gladness to witness the joy of Zion and Jerusalem. We are equally confident that the same is true with regard to our personal bereavement. God will fulfill his promise that those who dwell in the dust shall awake and joyfully sing. Great indeed will be the happiness and rejoicing then, when all will meet together after the resurrection of the dead.
Thank you. So that's the ultimate. The coming of Mashiach, the resurrection of the dead, will be reunited with all our loved ones, and we'll get back to that in a moment. But for now, if you will, take a moment and reflect upon not just this past class, but all 6 classes. And jot down 1 or 2 ideas from all 6 classes. I'm sure there were many, but 1 or 2 ideas from all 6 classes that resonated most with you. And 1 idea that now that we've gone through all these ideas, all these concepts, 1 idea that we can utilize to make our life better in the here and now. Take a moment.
Lesson 6. Life is short-ish. 1. Our exploration of death and the afterlife through the Torah's lens reduces our fear and unease, allowing us to consider our mortality without panic. 2. Some believe that because we eventually die, nothing is overly important. But Judaism insists that because we die, each moment of life is of supreme importance and should be devoted to matters of eternal relevance. Considering our mortality motivates us to focus on what really matters. 3. Our natural illusion of immortality spurs us to consider time as dispensable. We care more about wasted money than wasted time. Reflecting on life's finitude replaces this illusion with an urgency to take advantage of each moment. 4. We are designed to be productive beings. Retirement is not a Jewish concept. As our brute powers wane, we should transition to mentoring, sharing our wisdom and experience, etc. 5. Before the sin of the tree of knowledge, the body was the soul's extension, and their desires were synced. Sin destroyed that dynamic, causing spiritual death, the misalignment of body and soul. Physical death is an outgrowth of spiritual death. 6. We rectify spiritual death by realigning everything with its purpose, ignoring the superficial layers of a thing, its body, and instead focusing on its inner truth and purpose, soul. Upon completing this rectification, physical death will no longer be part of the human condition.
So with that, we finished this course, The Journey of the Soul. Hopefully it was an inspirational journey, a powerful journey, and a journey that will push us to do more and take the next step. But I mentioned before about the resurrection of the dead that we're going to get back to it, because I'd like to share with you that the coming course will be an in-depth course on the coming of Mashiach and the resurrection of the dead and who Mashiach is, what Mashiach is from a Jewish perspective. And we have a short clip on. So we hope you will join us for that course and for this upcoming course as well, beginning after Pesach in about a month. Look out in your emails for that.